When I ask people who practice user or design research what is their biggest challenge, I often hear how hard it is to engage stakeholders with research. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, yeah, I think it can be, and I think there are two things that I'm always conscious of when we're starting a new project and I'm meeting up with the stakeholders around that. And the first is framing the research. For us, it's research, and that's our kind of technical word for it. But for the stakeholders, they need to understand, well, why is it happening. So we always frame it as validation, because that answers to their fears. What if we do the wrong thing? Well, we're going to validate what we're doing. So thinking about what their needs are, and framing the research in terms of their needs is very important. And the other thing about buy-in, I think, is really participation. I mean, if the stakeholders are going to believe in the research, it's so much better if they participate in it. So we make sure that if we're talking to a sample of users, that we'll try and do that as close as possible to where the stakeholders are. We'll bring them, if they're watching in a viewing room, we'll have them take notes, and we'll encourage them to put notes on post-its and to talk about what they're seeing, and make them, collaborate in collecting the data and in discussing the data and analysing the data. And at that point, they've got an emotional buy-in. And it's much easier. Then they're eager to see, well, what happened in the other tests, what happened in the other interviews, and to see how what they saw fits into the bigger picture. But whatever, they've got an experience which is much deeper, and I think that's really important.
Do you ever let stakeholders moderate sessions?
Not directly, but in say in the user test lab, we'll have an IM link, instant messenger link, between the moderator and the note taker, and the note taker's sitting in with the other observers, and so as the other observers have questions, the note taker will kind of pass some of those things through to the moderator. It's important not to overload the poor moderator, but that sense of collaborating in the research as it unfolds is really important.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing from UX practitioners who work in agencies as well as from self-employed ones that research is usually the first thing to make it out of a project after the client sees a project proposal. How do you position UX research to your stakeholders to prevent this from happening?
Well, again, it's inherent to our process, and so as we're selling in, how we're going to go about tackling a project, how we're going to look at a design or a redesign problem, then it begins and ends with research. And I think in different cultures that's more or less acceptable. And cultures can be countries, or cultures can be the cultures of an organization. But some organizations, really like the pragmatic approach and the idea that, the project is going to be about finding out and experimenting. Well, they like that. Other organizations like to see a good process and knowing that, research is built into the project plan in the same way that the International Standards Organization says that user-centered design should be done. They like that. Some organizations like the idea that they're hiring experts, and they inherently don't like the idea that you're going out and research, because you should know, and maybe they should just hire somebody who knows, and those are a lot tougher to crack, and you kind of sometimes need to go a bit undercover with them, or get them to think back on their own experiences and start to expose the cracks and the flaws that way.
UX researchers sometimes experience a tension between conducting research they were asked to do by their stakeholders, for example, a product manager or an engineer, versus research they were not asked to do but think they should do. What are your thoughts on balancing this tension?
I think it's important to get the research done as early as possible in your project, because if you run out of time, you get under pressure later on in the project, and research gets cut, and that happens. We're not the only people who find ourselves under that pressure. I mean, the developers find themselves under that pressure, designers. So we're not in a unique position. But at least if you've done some research at the beginning that's as broad-ranging as possible, you've got a body of knowledge to fall back on. And then later on, if you don't get the opportunity to do all the research that you want, well, there may be other sources of data, sources of information. I've never come across a client yet that didn't have sitting somewhere some market research that they'd done, or some web analytics that were available to you, or even a discussion forum where you could see what people were doing. So there are always some undercover ways of validating ideas later on. But I guess the important thing is get some really broad-based research done at the start of the project, and that kind of gets you in tune with this particular set of users and this particular design problem.
All right. So can you tell me a story about a difficult stakeholder who did not understand or respect UX research?
Yeah. We had a project a couple of years ago where the IT director had some prior knowledge and experience of usability issues, and that had come from some trusted experts, world-renowned people, very famous people that he'd engaged with on some previous projects years before, but he took their specific advice for those projects as general principles. And so when it came for us to report back on the research that we'd done, what he saw really was, I've got a report here from a handful of users that's new, and I've got knowledge here from these world-renowned experts. Which one do I believe? And of course, he always fell back on the world-renowned experts that he'd spoken to years before, and so getting him to shift was really hard. And I think one of the problems there was that he'd never come along to any of the sessions that we ran, so he hadn't seen for himself, he hadn't experienced for himself, and it was pushing a heavy boulder uphill.
Many UX practitioners are always looking for creative deliverables that engage their stakeholders with research findings. What are some deliverables you found to be working well for you?
I love Indy Young's mental models. They're fantastically, they provide a fantastic map, really, of the user experience, and you can use that map to record findings as you conduct more research. You can accrue more data onto those mental models, and you can also see the gaps in your knowledge, and you can see where you might have data which is quite old, and you can see that things may have changed, and putting those up as setting aside a wall and putting up just post-its with those findings. It's this kind of living space. It engages people. It's very visible, and so it's the sort of thing that when a stakeholder is discussing an issue with you, you can walk over to that and discuss it next to your big record of all the previous research you've done. So I love them. They're very simple to build and maintain, and it's another use of post-its, which obviously I love.
How can UX practitioners tell if their stakeholders are bought into research?
I think once the stakeholders are bought into research, they start coming to you. They start asking. So that's a good sign when people are coming to you and asking you questions about how users behave, and they want to come to the research sessions, and they want to send their staff. So when you've got that level of demand, when suddenly they start pestering you, that's when you know that that they understand what's going on and they really care.
This is all I have for you. Do you have anything you want to add to this topic?
I think often we treat research as a scientific exercise, and that's a half of what it is, and I think it's very difficult anyway to be scientific in something as messy as, you know, everyday human behaviour. For me, the big value of research is in shifting people's mindset, in shifting people's perspective away from, you know, what they see day to day, and what they see day to day in their lives is their desk and the office beyond that, and the company, and somewhere on the horizon there are the customers or the users of the products, and research really flips that right over, and it brings the users and their problems into the stakeholders' lives, and so it changes the way they think, and they think less about, you know, the office politics and more about, you know, well, how are we going to fix this problem, and that's the real value of research, not in producing something that's beautifully statistically valid, but in shifting people's focus and in changing the conversation, and that can have a profound effect on an organisation.
All right, thank you very much.
Cool.